The room went quiet before he spoke, and that's how I knew something was wrong. Not the gentle quiet that comes after a good meal, not the tired quiet of family settling in. This was the kind of quiet that pulls inward tight and warning like the air itself had been told to behave. My shoulders stiffened before my mind caught up. My fingers tightened around my fork. Something in me knew I was about to be reduced. The tap landed light on my shoulder. Casual, polite. That was what made it dangerous. We were mid-dinner plate, still warm, candles, steady laughter lingering from a story that hadn't finished landing. Nothing about the moment looked like conflict, and that's what made it worse. I turned slowly, already wearing the smile I've learned to wear when men decide to test how much space they're allowed to take. Julian leaned in, close, not aggressive, not rushed close enough that the words would belong to me alone. His voice didn't lower. His hands didn't shake. "My parents don't want you at our wedding," he said calmly. Then, like he was offering a solution instead of an eraser, he added, "You can stream it online." For a second, I didn't breathe. The words didn't crash. They didn't echo. They landed cleanly. Practice the kind of sentence someone rehearses before delivering it where witnesses can pretend they didn't hear. Around us, the table kept moving. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed too loud at the wrong moment. A cousin kept talking, unaware or unwilling to notice what had just been taken from me in public. I watched Julian's face. He didn't look apologetic. He didn't look nervous. He looked settled, like the decision had already been approved, and my presence was just something that needed managing. Across from me, his mother's lips pressed into a neat line that passed for manners. His father didn't even look up, just kept cutting his food. Steady hands like this wasn't news. That's when I understood this wasn't a suggestion. It was an announcement. I swallowed what rose in my chest. Heat, disbelief, and old ache I refused to name, and nodded once slow and measured as if he'd commented on the weather. I placed my fork down carefully. The soft clink against the plate sounded louder to me than any scream. Men like him watch your reaction. They wait to see if your face will ask permission to exist. I wasn't going to give him that. The table tried to recover. Conversation stumbled forward. Laughter thinned but didn't disappear. Normally attempted to reclaim the moment, and I let it, because dignity sometimes means staying still while the room decides whether it will correct itself. I didn't look at my daughter right away. I wanted one last second of pretending she hadn't heard him. One fragile moment where I could believe she would step in without me needing to feel small first. But silence has weight, and I felt hers shift beside me. The air changed. Julian straightened, satisfied, reaching for his glass like the matter was closed, like my role had just been reassigned to a screen and a login. His comfort filled the space between us, heavy and unchallenged. That's when my daughter lifted her eyes. She didn't look at him first. She looked at me, not embarrassed. Not apologetic, not with that warning look daughters give when they want their mothers to shrink for the sake of peace. This look was different, still measuring the look of someone realizing a line had been crossed that couldn't be laughed off later. I kept my smile in place even as it tightened, because I've lived long enough to know that dignity is sometimes the only weapon you can hold without anyone seeing it in your hand. My name is Gloria Mercer. I've sat through polite disrespect dressed up as family decisions more times than I care to count. But nothing prepares you for the moment someone tries to erase you in front of your own child. If you're watching this right now and you've ever had to smile through something that cut you just to keep the room from falling apart, tell me where you're watching from, your city or your country, so I know how many women understand what that silence costs. Nain's napkin slid from her lap to the table. slow and deliberate, like she was setting something down she wouldn't pick back up. Julian didn't notice. His mother did. Her eyes flicked toward Nayan's hands sharp and assessing her jaw, tightening just enough to give her away. Conversation thinned chairs, shifted. The room leaned toward us without meaning to. Then Nayan pushed her chair back. The sound wasn't loud, but it was final. Every head turned and then my daughter stood up. Nayan didn't slam anything. She didn't shout. She didn't point a finger like she was trying to win a fight. She just stood there, straight back, chin slightly lifted like the air itself had shifted and decided it belonged to her now. For a breath, nobody moved, even the smallest sounds. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft clink of a spoon against glass, felt too loud inside that silence. Julian's posture stayed relaxed, almost lazy, like he was waiting for her to sit back down and turn the moment into a joke, the way people do when they want peace more than truth. His parents' faces held that tight politeness I've learned to read over the years, mouths shaped into smiles that never reach the eyes that measure you like you're a problem they're trying to solve without getting their hands dirty. Nayan's hands stayed open at her sides, empty calm, and that calm frightened me more than anger ever could because anger burns out. Calm makes decisions. She looked at Julian the way you look at someone you suddenly realize you don't recognize, and her voice came out steady and low, the kind of voice that doesn't ask for permission from the room. Then find yourself a new wife and a new job. The words didn't fly. They landed. They sat on the table between us like a document. Nobody could tear up. Julian blinked once, like his brain needed a second to catch up to the fact that she'd said it out loud in front of witnesses. Then he laughed. It wasn't a big laugh. It was small, clipped, dismissive, like a man brushing lint from his sleeve. He tilted his head and let his eyes sweep across the table, as if checking who was amused with him, as if he could recruit the room into treating my daughter's line like a tantrum. "Babe," he said softly, dragging the word out in a tone meant to soothe and control at the same time. "You're upset. Let's not do this right now." Nayan didn't answer him. She didn't explain herself. She didn't justify her loyalty to me, her mother, the woman he just tried to reduce to a link and a screen. She simply held his gaze until his laugh died on its own. That's when his mother made her move. Not with words, but with a sigh, a slow shake of her head. The kind of performance older women do when they want everyone to agree they're the reasonable one. "Nan," she said, voice sweet like syrup. "We didn't mean to cause offense. It's just weddings are delicate. Traditions, expectations, people talk." The way she said people talk made my stomach turn because it wasn't about tradition. It was about control. Her husband finally set his fork down and dabbed his mouth with his napkin, like he had all the time in the world. He looked at Nayan as if she were a child he could correct with enough patience. "Let's not ruin a good evening," he said, calm as a judge. "Emotions are high. Tomorrow, everyone will feel differently." Julian's smile returned at that, quick and grateful, because he believed they'd saved him. He believed this was just a storm to wait out. He even glanced at me then, not with apology, but with that quiet warning some men give older women when they think you should know your place. Like I was supposed to understand that in a marriage, mothers get managed. I kept my smile in place because I didn't trust my mouth. My hands were steady on my lap, but my heart was thudding hard, not from fear, from something else. Relief mixed with ache. I had spent too long teaching myself how to swallow pain to keep family together. And here was my daughter standing tall, refusing to swallow it for me. Nayan shifted her attention from Julian to his parents, and I saw something hardened behind her eyes, something professional and cold that didn't belong in a dining room, but belonged everywhere else she lived her life. "This isn't emotional," she said, still quiet, still controlled. "This is clarity." Julian's laugh tried to come back again, but it came out thinner this time. Unsure, his mother reached toward Nain like she could physically pull her back into compliance. Palm up, pleading without begging. "Sweetheart," she murmured, "you don't want to say things you can't take back." Nain finally moved, but not the way they expected. She didn't sit. She didn't soften. She reached for her phone on the table and slid it into her hand with a slow, deliberate motion that made Julian's eyes flick down and then back up. He watched that phone like it was a weapon he didn't understand yet. At the far end of the table, my cousin cleared his throat, then thought better of speaking. Nobody wanted to choose a side out loud, but everyone was choosing one in their bodies, turned shoulders, lowered eyes, held breaths. Julian kept that half smile on his face, and I could tell he was already telling himself a story where this would pass, where love would smooth it over, where a mother would be forgotten again if everyone just pretended long enough. His father lifted his glass and took a slow sip, as if to signal that the adult thing to do was move on. Julian followed his lead and picked up his own glass, tapping it lightly against the table, as if restarting the evening. He thought the night ended there. The apology didn't come with a knock on my bedroom door, and it didn't come with wet eyes or shaking hands. It came the way Julian did everything when he wanted control. Neat, measured, delivered at the exact time it could do the most work. The next morning, sunlight was pouring across the kitchen counter like nothing had happened, like last night hadn't carved a new line down the middle of our family table. I was rinsing a cup when my phone buzzed once. A soft vibration against my palm and Nain's voice floated from the hallway behind me. He sent a message. She said, not angry, not relieved, just flat like she'd been expecting it. I didn't turn around right away. I kept rinsing the cup, watching the water run clear, because I've learned that when something hurts your hands, look for simple tasks to keep you upright. Nain walked in and placed her phone on the counter between us, screen facing up. Julian's words sat there in a tidy paragraph. "Good morning." It began polite as a work email. "I want to apologize for how things came across last night. My parents were trying to protect the atmosphere of the wedding, and I should have handled it differently. I never meant to disrespect your mother. I hope we can move forward calmly." I read it twice. The first time, my chest tightened. The second time, I felt the cold underneath it. He didn't say he was wrong. He said it came across wrong. He didn't apologize for the decision. He apologized for the delivery. And right there inside that clean little message, he made his first mistake. He wrapped my place in the family inside the word atmosphere, as if my belonging was a decoration you could move for the sake of a picture. Nain didn't speak while I read. She leaned back against the counter, arms folded, eyes on my face, watching for the small tremors a daughter can't always prevent herself from looking for when she's deciding how much her mother can take. I kept my expression steady. "He wrote this like he's talking to HR," I said quietly. Nain's mouth twitched. Not a smile, not amusement. Recognition. "He wants the room back," she replied. The room. That's what it was to him, a room he could arrange. The hours after that message were strange. Not loud, not dramatic, just filled with careful movements. Julian came downstairs later, dressed like a man with Aaron's hair, neat voice, warm. He didn't look at me first. He looked at Nain like the apology was between them and I was simply the subject. "Morning," he said, then turned toward me with a smile that asked for no answer. "Miss Mercer." I hated how he used my last name. like respect was a costume he could put on when he needed witnesses. "I'm sorry about last night," he added, still standing a few feet away, still not stepping fully into my space. "I shouldn't have said it the way I did." There it was, again. The way. Nayan held him in silence for a moment, letting his words hang until he shifted his weight and his smile tightened. "You shouldn't have said it at all," she replied. Her voice wasn't sharp. It was controlled. Julian's eyes flashed for the briefest second, something small and annoyed before he smoothed it out. "I hear you," he said quickly. "I'm trying to make it right." Then he turned to his phone, tapped the screen, and put it on speaker like he was presenting evidence. His mother's voice filled the kitchen, sweet and bright. "Gloria, good morning." "Honey," she said, as if we were close, as if she'd ever called me honey before. "I've been thinking about last night. We were overwhelmed. Wedding nerves. We adore Nan and we want peace in this family. Please don't take it the wrong way." Her husband came on the line too, steady and calm. "Let's all move forward." He said, "We're family now. No need to let one moment define us." Nayan's eyes stayed on Julian while his parents spoke. I could see her mind working. How easy it would be to let the apology patch the surface. How tempting it would be to pretend harmony had been restored. Julian watched her like a man watching a door slowly open. "We still have a lot to do," his mother continued, slipping into logistics with practiced ease. "The venue needs final numbers, the seating chart, the rehearsal dinner. Let's not delay anything. That was how they did it. Wrap disrespect in a bow of planning. Bury last night under tasks so nobody had time to feel the bruise." Nayan didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just listened, face unreadable. And when the call ended, she picked up her phone and slid it into her pocket like she was filing the moment away. Julian exhaled with a quiet relief that made my stomach twist because he believed he'd fixed it. He believed the apology had earned him a reset. Later that afternoon, Nayan moved through the house with a strange calm. She answered a call about flowers. She nodded at a comment about guest lists. She didn't fight. She didn't cry. She didn't revisit last night. From the outside, it looked like we were back on track, like the storm had passed and the family had chosen peace. But I'd raised my daughter long enough to know the difference between peace and pause. I watched her set a stack of wedding papers on the dining room table, perfectly aligned, and something in my chest turned heavy. Her face was too still. Her movements were too careful. Julian hovered nearby, grateful, already acting like the house had forgiven him. That calm didn't feel earned. The strangest part of watching a man grow arrogant in your home is that it rarely starts with cruelty. It starts with comfort dressed up as gratitude. And by the time you notice the shift, everyone around you has already gotten used to the new shape of him. Nayan didn't bring Julian into our lives like a stranger. She met yesterday. She brought him in like a chapter she'd been waiting to reopen since she was a girl. And I could tell from the first time she said his name in my kitchen that she had already forgiven him for the years that passed without him. They had loved each other in high school, the kind of love young people swear is permanent, because they've never had anything taken from them yet. And then my husband died, and my world collapsed, and we left the country because grief makes you run even when you don't have a map. Nayan kept in touch with people for a while, but life pulls at young women like a tide, and time is ruthless about stretching distance into silence. Years went by. Then 2 years ago, Julian appeared again, like a sentence that hadn't finished calling Nayan and telling her he was in town looking for work, talking about how life had humbled him, how he'd missed her, how he'd never stopped thinking about the girl who used to sit across from him and dream out loud. Nain told me about it with a glow I hadn't seen in her in a long time. And as her mother, I wanted to be careful. But as a widow who has watched loss rearrange a child's heart, I understood why she wanted something familiar to hold. She didn't just meet him for coffee. She opened doors. She offered him a job in the company her father built and left to her, because that company wasn't just money. It was legacy. It was proof that my husband's hands had mattered on this earth, and Nain carried it like a crown and a burden at the same time. Julian came in humble at first. I'm grateful he kept saying eyes soft, shoulders slightly rounded, like a man who knew he was being given more than he deserved. He started by staying in the guest house. And I won't lie, I liked the way he spoke to me in those early days. He would ask if I needed anything from the store. He would call me ma'am. He would stand when I entered a room. He didn't act like a man who planned to erase me. He acted like a man who knew elders mattered. Nain was happy, and happiness makes you overlook small things. Then the small things began. Julian stopped asking before using the driveway like it was his. He started leaving his shoes by the front door like a permanent resident, not a guest. He would speak over Nain sometimes when she was telling a story, finishing her sentences, with that easy confidence that looks like affection until you see the woman go quiet afterward. When someone from the company called, he would answer in a voice that sounded like he belonged to the decision, not the conversation, saying things like, "We'll handle it," or "It's already being worked on." As if my daughter's authority was something he could borrow when it suited him. I noticed how he began to move through the house with less care, how he would open cabinets without closing them gently, how he would sit on the sofa and stretch out like the space was molded for his body. The day he started leaving his jacket on the chair in the dining room like it was his personal office, I felt something tighten in my chest, not because of the jacket, but because of what it signaled. He was settling into a role nobody had formally given him. Nain didn't see it at first. Or maybe she saw it and called it love. Because when you've waited a long time for a person to come back, you don't want to believe the return comes with terms and costs. Julian's parents began visiting more often as wedding talk grew, and their visits had a different energy. Quiet inspection like they were walking through an investment. His mother would glance at the walls and ask questions that sounded innocent but weren't. How long we'd lived here, how the neighborhood was what the arrangements were for after the wedding, where Nain planned to settle as a couple. His father spoke to Julian about the company with a pride that didn't belong to him, praising Nain's success while praising Julian's future as if her work was simply a ladder he could climb. The more those visits happened, the more Julian's posture changed. His gratitude became expectation. His politeness became performance. And then one afternoon I heard him say something to Nain in the hallway, quiet but sharp. You don't have to explain everything to your mother. And I realized he wasn't just getting comfortable in my home. He was getting comfortable with the idea that my presence was optional. When a man begins to believe he is necessary, he starts acting like everyone else is replaceable, and Julian started to carry himself like the house, the job, the woman, and the future were already secured by him simply being there. Comfort made him careless. Nain loved him in a way that made her softer in the house and sharper everywhere else, and watching that contrast used to comfort me. I'd see her walk through the front door with the weight of the company on her shoulders, voice clipped from meetings, jaw tight from decisions, and then she'd spot Julian in the kitchen, and her whole body would loosen like she'd been holding her breath all day. She wasn't pretending. That's the part people on the outside never understand. Women like my daughter don't fall for men because they're foolish. They fall because they are tired. and because the right kind of familiarity can feel like rest. Julian knew how to speak to her in a way that made her remember the girl she used to be before grief and responsibility hardened her. He called her by the nickname he used in school, soft and private, and I'd hear it from the hallway and feel something complicated in my chest. Relief that she still had tenderness in her life. Fear that tenderness can be used like a key. Nan kept saying it was destiny. Not in a childish way, but in that stubborn way grown women speak when they want to believe the universe hasn't been all lost. Mama, she told me one evening as she rinsed plates, "You don't understand. We didn't break up. Life just pulled us apart. And then he finds me again, right when he needs help. Right when I finally have something stable. That means something." I didn't argue. I'd learned that when a woman has already decided a man is part of her story, warnings sound like insults. Instead, I watched. I watched how Julian listened when Nyan talked about the company, how his eyes sharpened when she mentioned numbers, how he asked questions that sounded supportive but always circled back to access. Who signs what? Who approves what? Who is the last word? Nain answered him lightly the way you answer someone you trust. But she never told him everything. And that wasn't because she didn't love him. It was because she'd been trained by pain. The company was my husband's life's work built through years of sacrifice. I watched up close. Late nights, tired hands, prayers over bills, quiet pride when contracts came through. When he died, Nayan didn't inherit a dream. She inherited a machine that could feed families or destroy them, depending on who controlled it. My husband had once tried to protect that machine by bringing in his younger brother to help manage while he traveled. It sounded sensible. Family trust. And for a while, it worked until it didn't. I still remember the way my husband's face looked the night he came home too quiet. The way he sat at the edge of our bed and stared at his hands like he didn't recognize what he'd built anymore. He didn't give me every detail, but I heard enough in fragments. Accounts nearly shifted, decisions made without him, papers pushed across desks like normal business, and all of it wrapped in the same lie. This is family. This is for your good. The only thing that saved the company then was that my husband had kept certain documents in place, safeguards that required more than one set of hands, more than one signature, more than one person's good intentions. That experience changed Nain. It made her both generous and careful. The kind of careful that doesn't show up as distrust until someone tries to push too hard. So when she hired Julian, she did it the way she does everything. Warm heart, firm spine. She placed him close enough to feel involved, but not close enough to hold the wheel. He worked under her. Decisions still ran through her. Key information stayed where it belonged, and Julian never questioned it openly at first because he didn't want to look ungrateful. He let the comfort of the house soften him into believing time would do what pressure hadn't. He assumed marriage would unlock what professionalism wouldn't. Nain, for her part, didn't see him as a threat because he didn't behave like one in the ways people expect. He wasn't loud. He wasn't reckless. He didn't demand. He smiled. He helped. He folded himself into the home like a man building a future, and Nain interpreted that as commitment, not calculation. Still, there were moments, small, sharp moments that made me realize she was not as blind as her love made her look. I'd see her pause before answering certain questions. I'd watch her change the subject with a laugh. I'd catch her eyes on Julian when he spoke too confidently to company staff. And the look she gave him wasn't romantic. It was assessing. She didn't act on those moments because she didn't want to create a problem where there wasn't one. And because part of loving someone is choosing not to punish them for potential. But even in her softness, Nayan was never careless with what her father left behind. She trusted Julian with her heart. Yes, she trusted him with her house. Yes, she trusted him with her future. Yes, but she never handed him the keys to the one thing that could bury her if it fell into the wrong hands. And she never even had to announce that boundary out loud. It was simply there, quiet and immovable, like a locked door. You don't notice until you reach for the handle. Trust didn't mean blindness. Night in my house has always sounded like safety. Pipes settling, distant traffic, a clock marking time with steady patience. But that night, the quiet felt staged, like the house was pretending nothing had happened just to see if we would accept the lie. I lay in bed with my eyes open, the covers pulled up to my chest, listening to the faint shift of footsteps somewhere down the hall and the soft click of a door closing. The apology had smoothed the surface of the day, and the wedding papers had returned to the table like a peace offering, but my body didn't believe any of it. My smile from the dinner still sat on my face in my memory, like a bruise you can't see until the light hits it right. I kept replaying the way Julian leaned in, the way his words came out clean and confident, the way he delivered my exclusion like a decision already approved. That was what wouldn't leave me alone. How certain he'd been. Not just in what he said, but in the assumption that he had the right to say it. Somewhere close to midnight, I heard Nayan move. Not the restless pacing of someone spiraling, not the sniffle of someone crying into a pillow. It was deliberate footsteps that sounded like intention. A drawer slid open and shut. The faintest rustle of paper, then silence again. I stayed still because mothers know when to intrude and when to wait. A few minutes later, my door opened without a knock. Nayan didn't flick the light on. She stood in the doorway with only the hallway glow behind her. And for the first time since that dinner, I saw the full shape of what she was carrying. Her face wasn't angry anymore. It was set calm on the outside, but tied around the eyes in a way that told me her heart had already traveled somewhere colder than pain. She stepped inside and closed the door gently, then came to the foot of the bed like she was approaching a meeting, not her mother. "Mama," she said softly. I sat up a little, propping myself with one elbow. "I'm awake." I told her, and my voice surprised me by sounding normal. Nain nodded once, then held her phone in her hand without looking down at it, like she didn't trust what it might pull her into if she let herself stare too long. "I keep thinking about his face," she said. Not the words he'd spoken. His face. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't trying to soften it. I didn't answer right away. I watched her hands instead, the way her fingers kept pressing lightly against the edge of her phone, like she needed something solid to hold. Some men practice disrespect. I said quietly, "They don't say it unless they believe it's safe." Nayan's throat bobbed as she swallowed. "That's what I can't get past," she murmured. "He didn't try it. He stated it." She turned slightly, eyes traveling to the dark window as if the night outside could offer a reason that made it make sense. And his parents. Her mouth tightened. They didn't look surprised. My chest ached not because I didn't know what kind of world we lived in, but because I could feel the way Nayan was being forced to see her own love through a new lens. She took a breath and finally looked down at her phone. The screen lit her face for a second, then dimmed again when she locked it. "I let him in," she said, voice low. "I brought him here. I gave him a job. I let him live under your roof." The shame in her words cut me sharper than the insult ever could because I knew my daughter. She wasn't ashamed because she'd been wrong about a man. She was ashamed because she put me in position to be tested. I reached toward her without thinking and rested my hand lightly on her wrist. You didn't invite disrespect. I told her you invited love. Nain didn't pull away, but she didn't soften either. I need to understand something, she said, and her voice changed right there. Less daughter, more CEO, more woman trained by history. Because if it was just a rude moment, an apology would fix it. She lifted her eyes to mine, steady, unblinking. But that wasn't a rude moment. That was confidence. I felt the air shift between us, as if the house itself leaned in to listen. Nain's jaw set, and I could see her mind moving the way it does when she's closing a deal or reading a contract. Quick, exact, unforgiving. The pain in her eyes didn't disappear. It just moved behind something stronger. Tell me the truth, she said softly, as if speaking too loud would crack whatever she was building inside herself. When a man feels that comfortable, when he thinks he can decide where my mother belongs, what does he think he has? I didn't answer, because the answer wasn't in my mouth anymore. It was in her posture, in the stillness of her shoulders, in the way she'd stopped asking how to fix the feeling and started asking what the feeling meant. Nain's voice barely rose above a whisper, but it landed heavy in the dark room. Why did he feel that comfortable? The answer wasn't emotional, it was professional. By the end of that week, the house had a new kind of quiet, the kind that comes when everyone is moving carefully around a decision that has already been made. Julian still walked through the hallway like a man who expected time to soften Nain, like a man who believed apologies were currency, and patience would buy him his place back. He kept his voice gentle, his hands busy, his smile ready. He offered to pick up dinner. He asked if I wanted tea. He spoke to Nain like nothing serious had happened, calling her baby in that easy tone men use when they want to reattach a woman to the version of herself that forgives. But Nain didn't answer him the same way anymore. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She moved with that calm that looks like peace until you realize it's preparation. I watched her from the doorway one evening as she sat at the dining table with her laptop open, not looking at wedding papers now, but at something darker. Rose dates names, the kind of screen that doesn't hold romance. Julian hovered behind her with his arms loosely crossed, pretending interest, pretending support. And every few minutes he would lean in and say, "Everything okay?" Like he was checking the temperature of the room. Nain would nod without looking up. That nod was not comfort. It was distance. 2 days later, she left the house early in the morning wearing her business face. Hair pulled back, small earrings, no softness around the mouth. Julian was still in the kitchen when she walked out and he called after her, "We're still good, right?" Nain paused at the door just long enough for him to feel seen, then said, "We'll talk," and walked out. The way she said it made my stomach tighten because "we'll talk" can mean 100 things, but when it's spoken without warmth, it usually means one. That afternoon, Nain came home with the kind of stillness that follows paperwork. Not anger, not tears, just the quiet weight of something finalized. Julian was on the sofa scrolling through his phone, relaxed like a man who thought the day belonged to him. He looked up when she entered. "Hey," he said, smiling too quickly. Nain didn't sit. She didn't take off her coat. She stood a few feet away and spoke in the same calm voice she used the night in my bedroom. "Your employment is ending," she said. Julian's smile stayed on his face for a second too long, then broke. "What?" He laughed lightly, trying to make it sound like a misunderstanding. "Babe, come on. You're still mad about Nain lifted one hand. Not dramatic, just enough to stop him." "It's not anger," she replied. "It's a decision." Julian's eyes flicked toward me, then back to Nayan. "You can't just do that," he said, and the first real edge slipped into his voice. His mother's tone flashed in him for a moment. Outraged politeness. "This isn't personal," Nayan repeated. "It's clean." Julian sat up straighter. "You're firing me," he said. The word sharper now, like he wanted it to hurt her. Nayan didn't flinch. "Your access ends today," she said. "Your accounts will be closed. Your files will be secured. You'll receive the paperwork." Julian stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. And maybe he was, because the Nayan standing in front of him was not the girl who believed in destiny. This Nayan looked like my husband when he used to walk into a room and reclaim what belonged to him. Julian stood up too fast, a burst of movement in the living room that made the air feel crowded. "This is crazy," he said, voice rising despite himself. "You're doing this because of your mother." I felt my spine stiffened, but I didn't speak. Nayan's gaze sharpened. "Don't put this on her," she said quietly. "This is about you." Julian's jaw worked as if he wanted to say more. Then he stopped catching himself, remembering the witnesses. He breathed out hard, forcing a smile back on his face like a mask. "Okay," he said. "Too calm, too quick. Fine, we'll cool off. You'll regret this, but okay." And that's when I understood something. He wasn't scared of losing the job yet. He was offended. Losing it didn't feel real to him. It felt like a threat that would pass. The next day, Nayan didn't spend time arguing with him about the relationship. She didn't sit him down for closure. She did what leaders do when trust breaks. She shut doors. I heard her on the phone in her office voice, low and controlled, speaking to someone at the company. "Revoke his access," she said. "All of it." A pause. "Yes, today." Another pause. "Archive his emails. I want everything saved." She didn't sound vengeful. She sounded careful. Later, she came into the kitchen with her laptop tucked under her arm and a folder in her hand. She didn't tell me everything, but I saw her eyes focused, unsettled, working. "When someone leaves suddenly," she said to me, almost like she was teaching, "you don't just lock the door, you look back through it." Julian was still in the house, still moving like he belonged, still acting like this was a rough patch and not a removal. That confidence made my skin crawl because in my experience, people only act that sure when they believe they have something to fall back on. That evening, Nayan sat alone at the dining table again, the same place where wedding papers used to sit, and the light from her screen washed her face pale. She read quietly for a long time, barely blinking. Then she pressed her lips together and exhaled through her nose. One controlled breath that told me she'd seen something she didn't like. "Mama," she said without looking up, voice tight. I stepped closer. "What is it?" I asked softly. Nain's eyes stayed on the screen. "It's not illegal," she said. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard like they didn't want to touch what they'd found. "But it's not innocent. What they found wasn't illegal, but it wasn't innocent." Nain didn't call me into her office with drama. She didn't burst into my room with her hands shaking and her voice breaking. She did it the way she did everything once her heart hardened into focus. Quiet, precise, almost gentle, as if she was trying not to bruise me with information that would bruise her first. I was wiping down the counter when she appeared in the kitchen doorway, laptop under one arm, a stack of printed pages in her other hand. Her face was composed, but her eyes had that sharp shine they get when she's trying to hold two truths at once. I loved him, and he wasn't who I thought. Mama," she said softly, "I need you to see something." I dried my hands slowly and followed her into her office. The room smelled like paper and perfume, and something sterile like work. The curtains were half drawn and the light fell in thin lines across the desk. Nan sat down but didn't lean back. She stayed forward, elbows close, like a woman bracing. She turned her screen toward me and slid the printed pages across the desk without comment. I looked down and saw my daughter's company name at the top of an email thread, bold and official. Then I saw Julian's name not as Julian, not as Nain's fiancé, but as a sender moving through conversations like he owned the authority to be there. The first thing that hit me wasn't a single sentence. It was a pattern. The way he wrote, the way he spoke through text, he didn't sound like an employee. He didn't even sound like a trusted partner. He sounded like a man already wearing a title he hadn't earned. We'll proceed as discussed, as one email read, "Add address to a vendor I didn't recognize. I want the revised terms in writing by Friday so we can finalize after the wedding." After the wedding, my throat tightened. I glanced up at Nan, but she didn't look away. She held my eyes like she was saying, "Don't make me carry this alone." I looked back down. Another email, newer this one, with a short subject line, "Next steps." Julian had written, "As we transition into the next phase, I'll be consolidating decisions through one channel to avoid delays. Please run approvals through me so we can move faster through me." The arrogance of it sat in my stomach like cold food. He hadn't asked Nain if that was okay. He hadn't said, "Nan and I." He hadn't said, "I'll check with her." He had simply written himself into the center of it all, as if the company my husband built and my daughter protected was a table he could pull his chair up to and claim. Nain tapped the screen and scrolled. "Look at the dates," she said, voice low. I leaned and my eyes caught on calendar invitations, meeting requests, several of them sent to key people at the company. The subject lines were clean and corporate leadership, alignment, strategic restructure, vendor consolidation, and there in the details were dates set just weeks after the wedding. Times blocked off like those decisions were inevitable. I felt a sick heat rise behind my ribs. He planned meetings. I whispered. Nain nodded once. "He scheduled a future," she replied, and the way she said it sounded like betrayal. I turned another page, a draft document not signed, not official, but written with enough confidence to be dangerous. It wasn't a full plan. It was more like an outline, bulleted points, headings, the kind of internal thought people usually keep private. Operational oversight. One section read, "Streamline reporting lines." Another section, "Executive visibility. Ensure unified authority." Unified authority. Nain pointed to a line near the bottom. "Read that," she said. My eyes moved and my breath caught. It wasn't a confession. It was worse. It was assumption. Once family integration is complete, we can implement the new structure without resistance. Family integration. My skin went cold. I didn't need a lawyer to tell me what he meant. He meant marriage. He meant locking himself into Nain's life so deeply that pushing him out would feel like ripping out a wall. I looked up slowly, and the office felt smaller. The air heavier. Nain's lips were pressed tight, and I could see the war inside her, the woman who had laughed with him in the kitchen, and the CEO reading a man's ambition like a threat assessment. "Mama," she said, and her voice wavered for the first time since that night in my bedroom. "He's been talking to people like this for months." I swallowed hard. "Why didn't anyone tell you?" I asked. Nain's jaw tightened. "Because he didn't announce it," she replied. He slid into conversations. He spoke like it was already agreed. She leaned forward and flipped to another email. This one short, casual, almost friendly. A vendor wrote, Sounds good, Julian. Appreciate you taking the lead. We'll wait for your final. I stared at that sentence until it blurred. Taking the lead. Waiting for your final. Julianne had been collecting authority the way some men collect favors, quietly, slowly, with a smile. Nan exhaled sharp and controlled. He didn't steal, she said as if she needed to hear herself say it. He didn't transfer anything. He didn't touch the accounts. She looked at me, then eyes glossy but fierce. But listen to how he spoke. I felt my pulse in my throat because in those words, in that tone, in that casual ownership, I could finally see the line from the dinner to this desk. He tapped my shoulder because he believed the house was already his. He told me to stream the wedding because he believed my role was already reduced, and now here it was on paper. His belief that after the wedding, the company would be pliable in his hands. I reached for Nain's hand without thinking, and she let me hold it. Fingers cold. He's planning, I whispered. Nain nodded once slow. Yes, she said. He's planning. Her gaze dropped back to the documents, hardening again. And the worst part is, she added quietly, he thinks it's normal. The room went still around that sentence. The pages on the desk looked harmless. Email threads, meeting, invites, drafts. No crime, no theft, no smoking gun. Just a man speaking like a future that wasn't his had already been promised. And I realized something that made my stomach turn. The most dangerous plans don't announce themselves. They practice. They posture. They assume. He hadn't taken anything yet. The first time Julian's mother called after the termination, Nain let it ring out. We were in the living room, the late afternoon lights slanting through the curtains, and the phone vibrated on the arm of the sofa like a warning. Nain didn't glance at the screen at first. She stared straight ahead, jaw tight, shoulders still, as if the sound itself was a test of whether she would step back into the old role. Polite daughter-in-law to be eager to smooth discomfort. The buzzing stopped. A second later, it started again. Nain reached for the phone calmly and turned it over so the screen faced down, cutting the light from it like she was shutting a door. Let it go to voicemail, she said quietly. Her voice was steady, but I could see a pulse working in her neck. Silence returned, thin and uneasy. 5 minutes later, the house phone rang. That one startled me because people only use that line when they want to force you to answer. Nain stood up slowly and walked to the hallway where the handset hung her steps, controlled, measured, like she was walking into a boardroom. She lifted the receiver and didn't speak first. She let the other side reveal their tone. Nain, Julian's mother, said breathless, too bright. Sweetheart, thank God. We've been trying to reach you. Nain's eyes flicked toward me once. Not for permission, for witness. I'm listening, she replied. Her voice was calm in a way that made my stomach tighten. Because calm like that doesn't invite conversation. It sets terms. Julian's mother rushed ahead, words tumbling over each other like she could drown Nain in them. This has gone too far. There's been a misunderstanding. Julian is under stress. You know how men get when they feel embarrassed. You can't just end his job like that. People will talk. There it was again. People will talk like the world was supposed to be the judge of my daughter's decisions. Nain didn't react. She didn't defend. She didn't explain. She waited, letting the woman exhaust herself. Julian's father took the phone. Next voice, deeper, slower, trying to sound reasonable. Nan, he said, we need to handle this privately. A man's livelihood isn't something you play with because of a family disagreement. Nain's mouth tightened. His livelihood wasn't ended because of a disagreement, she said softly. It was ended because of conduct. Conduct. The word made Julian's father pause, and I could feel him recalculating on the other end. Conduct, he repeated, as if he didn't like that the situation had moved out of the emotional lane where guilt works best. Nayan didn't offer details. She didn't accuse. She didn't hand them an argument. This is not negotiable. She said, voice still low. Julian has paperwork. He can move forward accordingly. Julian's mother jumped back in, sharper, now her sweetness thinning. But you don't understand what you're doing, she said. You're humiliating him. Nain's eyes hardened. He humiliated my mother, she replied. And the words came out flat factual like she was reading from a report. A beat of silence crackled on the line. Then Julian's mother sighed, heavy and theatrical, the kind of sigh meant to signal sacrifice. Gloria is an elder, she said, and for a moment I almost believed she was about to show respect. But then she added, and elders should understand their place. We weren't trying to hurt her. We were trying to protect the wedding. Protect. Always protect. Protect the atmosphere. Protect the image. Protect the event. Never protect the human being sitting at the table. Nain's fingers tightened around the receiver. My mother's place is not up for discussion, she said quietly. Julian's father's voice returned firmer edged now. You are making an emotional decision. He said, this isn't how business is handled. Once you're married, you'll regret treating your husband like an employee. Nain didn't blink. The way her body still told me that sentence had hit something not because it hurt, but because it revealed. She leaned her head slightly like she was listening to a sound only she could hear. Say that again, she said softly. Julian's father paused, irritated. I said, you'll regret. No. Nain interrupted, voice still calm but sharper now. The part before that. Another pause. Julian's mother rushed in impatient. Nain, don't do this, she snapped. You know what we mean. After the wedding, everything was supposed to change. The words fell into the hallway like a dropped plate. Sharp, unmistakable, impossible to pretend you didn't hear. Nain's face didn't contort. She didn't gasp. Her eyes just narrowed slightly. And in that narrowing, I saw the final piece slide into place. Everything she repeated quietly as if tasting it. Her voice stayed polite, but the air around her felt colder. Julian's mother, realizing she'd said too much, tried to backpedal fast. Not like that, she babbled. I just mean family dynamics roles. You know, once you're married, a man needs stability. Nain closed her eyes for a brief second, then opened them again, and I understood in my bones that she had crossed a line inside herself. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't say, how dare you? She simply ended it the way she ends meetings that waste her time. Thank you for clarifying, she said softly. This conversation is over. She placed the receiver back on the hook with a gentle click that sounded louder than a slam in the quiet hallway. For a moment, she stood there with her hand still hovering near the phone, breathing, slow face unreadable. Then she turned toward me, and the look in her eyes made my stomach drop. Not because she was scared, but because she was sure. Mama, she said, voice low controlled. They weren't talking about a wedding. They were talking about a takeover. I felt the room tilt, not from shock, but from recognition, because suddenly the tap on my shoulder, the stream it online, the rehearsed disrespect, the emails, the schedules, it all lined up into one clean, ugly truth. Nain's mouth tightened into something that wasn't a smile and wasn't a frown. It was resolve. That's when we finally understood the dinner. Nain didn't sleep after that call. I could tell by the way the house sounded before sunrise, quiet but not resting, like a mind was moving through rooms, even when the body stayed still. When I stepped into the kitchen early the next morning, she was already there, not dressed for work, yet hair pulled back in a loose twist, a mug of coffee cooling untouched beside her laptop. The screen was open, but she wasn't typing. She was staring, eyes fixed on something that wasn't on the page. Her face looked older in the dim light, not because of age, but because of clarity. I moved quietly, not wanting to startle her out of whatever she was piecing together. And she noticed me anyway. My daughter always notices. "Sit," she said, voice gentle but firm. And I sat across from her at the table where we used to lay out wedding plans. The irony of that hit me hard, but I didn't say it. Nayan inhaled slowly, then slid her laptop to the side as if the screen wasn't enough to hold what she needed to say. "Mama," she began, and the way she said it carried something heavy, regret, anger, and a kind of shame that made my chest tighten. "I need to tell you the truth about something." I waited. She looked down at her hands. "There were moments," she said carefully, "when I corrected you in front of him." My throat tightened, but I didn't interrupt. Nain's voice dropped. "Not because you were wrong, but because I was trying to keep peace. I was trying to keep everything smooth, and I didn't realize I was teaching him something." She lifted her eyes to mine, and there was no defensiveness there, no blaming, just ownership. "I taught him that you could be managed." She said quietly, "That sentence cut deeper than Julian's insult because it was my child saying it and it was true. I remembered those small moments now, the ones that seemed harmless at the time. Me telling Julian to lower his tone with a delivery man. Me reminding him to wipe his feet before coming inside me, telling him not to answer Nayan's work calls." Nayan had stepped in, gently smiling, telling me, "Mama, it's fine." As if I was being too strict, as if I was embarrassing her. I hadn't fought her on it because I didn't want to look like a stubborn mother competing with her daughter's happiness. But a man watches those moments differently. He doesn't see a daughter smoothing things over. He sees a hierarchy. Nain's jaw tightened as she spoke. "He thought you were the soft spot," she continued. "The part of my life I would compromise to keep him comfortable." My hands went cold on the table. Nain leaned forward slightly, voice quiet but intense. "That dinner," she said, "wasn't him losing control. It was him testing control." The words hung between us. She reached into a folder beside her laptop and pulled out the printed emails, the meeting invitations, the draft outlines she'd shown me before. She didn't push them toward me this time. She kept them close, like she was looking at something that had bitten her. "Do you know what I see now?" she asked softly. I shook my head. Nain's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with precision. "I see a man who thought marriage would turn my life into a shared asset." She said, "Not because I promised him anything, because he believes that's how it works." She tapped the papers once, a light sound on wood, those meetings he scheduled after the wedding. She said he planned them like he'd already been crowned. She exhaled through her nose, controlled. And that call from his parents, her mouth tightened. That wasn't panic. That was entitlement slipping out of their mouths by accident. Nain leaned back slightly, shoulder stiff, and I could see her replaying the scene at dinner, the way I had replayed it in my bed. The tap, the lean, the calm voice, the way he said I could stream it online as if he was assigning me a seat at the back of my own family. Mama Nayan said again, and the tenderness in her voice almost made me flinch. "They weren't trying to hurt your feelings." I blinked. "They were trying to remove you." She corrected immediately, and the bluntness of it made my stomach drop because you're the one thing they can't control through him. She pointed toward the hallway toward the parts of the house that had been mine long before Julian walked in. "This home is yours," she said. "Your presence is yours. Your relationship with me is yours. And as long as you're here, he can't fully step into the role he wants." I swallowed, feeling the sting behind my eyes. So he wanted me gone before the wedding. I whispered, "Nen not at you shifted out of the picture," she said, "because once he marries me, he thinks the house changes, the company changes, my decisions change, and if you're still in the center of this family," she paused, eyes hardening, "you'll see what he's doing. You'll push back. You'll remind me who I am." My chest tightened because I knew she was right. A mother's presence is not just emotional, it's a tether, it's memory, it's accountability. Nain reached across the table and covered my hand with hers, warm and steady. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for every time I made you smaller to keep peace." The apology in her mouth was different from Julian's. Hers was clean. It didn't hide behind atmosphere or delivery. It was real. I squeezed her hand once and she squeezed back, then released, straightening as if that small moment of softness was all she could afford before returning to steel. "Now I see it," she said, voice low. "The wedding wasn't the goal. The wedding was the lock." She lifted her eyes to mine, calm and unwavering, and I felt something shift inside me. Fear turning into clarity, hurt, sharpening into readiness. Nayan didn't need to shout. She didn't need to threaten. She had reached the place where a woman stops reacting and starts acting. And as I sat there, I realized the cruelest part of what Julian had done wasn't the words he said at dinner. It was what those words revealed about how he saw me, not as a mother, not as an elder, not as family, just as an obstacle. The insult wasn't personal. It was strategic. The next few days moved like a quiet storm, nothing crashing, nothing screaming, but everything rearranging behind closed doors. Nayan didn't tell Julian her next steps in advance. She didn't argue with him over intentions he would deny. She didn't sit across from him at the dining table and beg for honesty. She treated what she discovered the way she treated any threat to what her father built. She contained it, documented it, and sealed every opening a person like Julian could slip through. I saw it in the way she began taking calls in her office with the door shut, voice low, careful. I saw it in the way she started leaving the house earlier and returning later, eyes focused, posture tight. Julian noticed too, but he misread it. He thought she was cooling down. He thought the distance meant she would come back around once her anger burned out. He kept playing gentle. He cooked once as if food could reset a betrayal. He left a bouquet of flowers on the kitchen counter one morning, bright and unnecessary, like romance could cover ambition. He even tried with me, catching me near the hallway and saying, "Miss Mercer, I don't want this between us," as if we were equals in a misunderstanding. I kept my face neutral, but inside I felt something settle. The kind of stillness you get when you finally understand a person is not confused. They are calculated. On the fourth day after that call with his parents, Nayan invited me to ride with her. She didn't say where we were going. She just stood by the front door with her keys in hand and said, "Come with me, Mama." In a tone that wasn't asking, we drove across town in silence, the radio off the air inside the car, thick with everything neither of us wanted to say. Nayan's hands were steady on the wheel and her eyes didn't wander. When we pulled into a parking lot lined with offices, she turned the engine off and finally looked at me. "I need you to hear this," she said. "Not because you have to do anything, because I don't want you to feel confused about what's happening." I nodded inside the building. The air smelled like paper and cold air conditioning. We sat in a small conference room with a polished table and 2 chairs on one side. A woman walked in carrying a folder, face professional, voice calm. Nain stood to shake her hand first, then sat back down, spine straight. The woman spoke carefully using plain words, not dramatic ones. I reviewed the communications you provided, she said, flipping open the folder. There's no evidence of theft, but there is evidence of misrepresentation presenting himself as having authority. He did not have misrepresentation. The word sounded clean, but what it meant was ugly. Julian had been moving through my daughter's world like he owned it, telling people a story that wasn't true. Nain didn't react. She listened, eyes sharp. The woman continued. The most important thing is separating access from relationship. She said, he can't claim confusion later. He can't claim he thought he was being made a decision maker because of the engagement. Nain's mouth tightened slightly. He did think that she said quietly. The woman nodded once. Then we make sure the paper trail shows he was wrong. She slid the folder toward Nain. This documents his role, his limits, the end of his employment, and that he has no authority to represent the company in any capacity. Nain flipped through pages silently, then stopped at one section and tapped the paper once. And the company, she asked, my father's assets. The woman's voice stayed calm. This confirms he has no interest in ownership, no claim, no pathway through marriage. She said, and it lays out the boundaries clearly. Nain exhaled slowly as if she'd been holding that breath since the dinner. I sat there listening hearty because I knew what it meant when lawyers step into a love story. It means the love story is already over. When we left the building, Nain didn't cry. She didn't lean on my shoulder. She just walked with purpose. Folder in hand, eyes forward like a woman building a wall, brick by brick. Back at home, Julian was in the living room, phone in his hand, smiling too easily. Hey, he said, rising halfway like he was still playing house. Nain didn't greet him. She didn't sit. She placed the folder on the coffee table between them and said, read. Julian's smile faltered. What is this? He asked, trying to laugh. Nain's voice was low and flat. It's the boundary you assumed you didn't need. Julian flipped through pages quickly, his eyes darting like a man searching for a loophole. This is extreme, he said, voice sharpening. You're acting like I'm a criminal. Nain didn't raise her voice. She held him with stillness. You're not a criminal, she said. You're ambitious, and you tried to make your ambition my problem. Julian's jaw tightened. So what, you want me to just leave? He snapped, and the mask slipped further. Nain nodded once. You're being offered a clean exit, she said. Quiet. No scene, no public mess. You sign, you pack, and you go. Julian looked at her as if she'd slapped him. You're throwing away everything, he said. And there it was, the part that wasn't about love. Everything the way his parents had said it. His eyes flicked toward me, quick and resentful, like I was the reason the door was closing. Nain noticed that glance, and something in her expression hardened. Don't look at my mother like that, she said softly. This is your doing. Julian's breathing grew louder. You're being cold, he hissed. Nain's eyes didn't soften. I'm being clear, she replied. Cold is what you were when you tapped her shoulder and erased her like she was a problem. Julian opened his mouth, then closed it again because he couldn't argue with what he'd done in front of witnesses. He stared down at the folder like it was betrayal on paper, then pushed it back across the table, as if shoving it away could change what it represented. Nain didn't move the folder. She didn't chase him for agreement. She didn't plead. She simply stood there and waited the way people wait when they know they're done. Julian's face shifted through anger, panic, calculation. Finally, he swallowed hard and said, "If I sign this, what happens to us?" Nain's voice stayed steady. "There is no us without truth," she said. Julian's eyes flashed. "So this is it," he muttered. Nain nodded once. "This is it," she echoed. And in that moment, I realized something that made my stomach turn with both pain and pride. My daughter wasn't destroying him. She was removing him quietly, cleanly, completely. Julian stared at the papers again, and when his hand finally reached for a pen, it trembled just slightly because for the first time, the consequences were real. Nain didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She watched that door closed forever. Julian didn't panic the day he signed. Not out loud. Not where anyone could watch him lose control. He carried himself like a man swallowing bitterness in public. Jaw tight, shoulders squared, voice clipped. He packed a few things into a bag like he was choosing to be temporary, like this was a short separation and not the start of a fall. He kept saying little sentences meant to keep power in his mouth. "I'll figure it out. This is unnecessary. You'll cool down." Nain didn't answer those sentences. She moved through the house with the same steady calm that had shut the door on him. And her silence did something to Julian that arguments never could. It made him realize there was nothing to fight. There was only time. 2 mornings later, I heard him on the phone in the guest room, voice low but urgent. The first real crack in his composure. "No," he hissed. "That can't be right." A pause. "I need options." Another pause longer because she can't just... He stopped himself when he heard my footsteps in the hallway. The door opened quickly and Julian stepped out with his face arranged back into that polite mask. "Morning," he said too brightly. I nodded and kept walking. But my heart had already started beating differently because I knew what that tone meant. It meant he had finally found the one consequence he couldn't charm his way out of. That afternoon, Nain called me into her office again. The light was soft, the curtains half drawn, and there was a different kind of tension in the room. Not discovery now, but logistics. Nain sat behind her desk with a thin folder in front of her, the kind of folder that holds deadlines. "Mama," she said, voice calm, "I want you to understand what's happening next so you're not caught off guard." I sat across from her, hands folded in my lap. "Okay," I said. Nain slid the folder toward me. Not for me to read every page, but to show me it was real. "Julian's right to be here is tied to his work." She said simply, "That's why he came looking for a job. That's why he pushed so hard to feel settled. Losing the job starts a clock." The way she said clock made my stomach tighten. A clock for what I asked softly. Nain's eyes didn't waver. "For him to either find new sponsorship or leave," she replied. "It's not immediate. It's not a scene at the door, but it's a countdown." I swallowed, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief because the universe had a way of closing doors my daughter didn't have to slam. Sadness because love shouldn't end with deadlines. Nain leaned back slightly, exhaling once. "He thought marriage would solve it," she added. And that sentence landed heavier than the rest. I pictured Julian at dinner again, so calm, so sure of himself, tapping my shoulder, like a man who believed he was already anchored. I understood now. The wedding wasn't just a celebration to them. It was a security plan. I heard voices downstairs. Julian's parents had come over again, and I could tell from the sharpness of their steps that they weren't here to apologize. They were here to push. Nain stood up, smoothing her blouse like she was stepping into a meeting. "Stay here," she told me gently, but I didn't. I followed her to the top of the stairs and listened from the landing as Julian's mother spoke, voice trembling with a rage. She was trying to wrap in manners. "You can't do this," she said. "You're ruining his future." Nain's voice carried up the stairs, calm and clear. "I'm not ruining anything," she replied. "I'm removing him from my company. His future is his responsibility." Julian's father cut in tone sharper. "You know he needs stability." He said, "You know he has paperwork tied to his work. You're being cruel." Nain didn't raise her voice. "Cruel would have been pretending I didn't see who he was," she said quietly. "Cruel would have been marrying him and spending years trapped under someone who thinks my mother is disposable." Silence stretched. Then Julian spoke, and it wasn't the confident Julian from my dinner table. It was thinner strained, almost pleading. "Nan," he said, voice low, "let's talk privately." Nan answered without softness. "There's nothing private left," she said. Julian's mother's voice cracked, not with sadness, but with panic. "The wedding she started." Nain interrupted, still calm. "There is no wedding," she said. That was the first time I heard her say it like a fact. And downstairs, the air seemed to shift. Julian's breath came out loud, and for the first time I heard fear in him, not embarrassment. You can't just cancel everything he said, and I could hear his mind racing behind the words. Nain's reply came quiet and final. "Watch me." After that, the call started not to Nain. She didn't pick up again. The calls went to Julian. I heard his phone buzzing constantly, and I heard him pacing the guest room like a trapped man whispering into the receiver. "I need something fast, and I don't have time, and no, I can't go back like this." Vendors began leaving messages for Nain, too polite, confused, asking about deposits and schedules. The wedding didn't explode. It stalled like a car that won't start, no matter how many times you turn the key. That evening, Julian came downstairs with his face, pale eyes darting, and he stood in the doorway of the kitchen like he didn't know where to place himself anymore. He looked at Nain the way a man looks at the person holding his last lifeline. "I just need a little time," he said, voice careful, trying to sound reasonable. Nain didn't look up from her laptop. "You already had time," she replied softly. Julian swallowed hard. "I can fix this," he insisted. Nain's fingers paused over the keyboard, and she finally lifted her eyes to him. Cold, steady, unreadable. "You can't fix what was never yours," she said. Julian stood there for a moment like he'd been slapped, then turned away quickly, shoulders hunched. The arrogance that had filled his voice at my dinner table was gone. In its place was urgency, sweat calculation. The same kind of urgency that makes people reveal their true intentions when they run out of room to pretend. And as I listened to him pacing upstairs again late into the night, I understood the deepest punishment Nain had handed him wasn't public humiliation or shouting. It was something quieter and more brutal. She had taken away the certainty he'd been living on. Time was no longer on his side. There's a difference between being put out and being removed. Being put out is loud. Voices raised doors, slammed neighbors peeking through blinds. Being removed is quieter. It's a decision carried out with calm hands, the way a woman folds away a tablecloth after a meal that will never be served again. Nain removed Julian the same way she removed him from her company. Clean measured no room for confusion, no room for him to twist the story into cruelty. She didn't want him leaving our house with a victim's narrative in his mouth. She wanted him leaving with truth. The morning she handled it, the house was bright with sunlight, and the normality of that brightness felt almost offensive. I was at the kitchen sink again, my hands always returning to water when my heart needs steadiness. When Nayan walked in, dressed for work, folder in hand, not the thick folder from the lawyer's office. This one was thinner, plain the kind of folder that holds a single decision. She set it on the counter and looked at me. "Mama," she said softly, "today he moves out." I didn't flinch. I didn't gasp. I had been waiting for the moment when the house would stop pretending Julian still belonged. But I felt a tightness in my chest anyway. Because even when you know a man deserves consequences, the act of separating lives still carries grief. How I asked, quietly. Nain's gaze stayed steady. Calmly, she replied, "No fighting, no shouting, just clear." A little later, Julian came downstairs in sweatpants with his phone in his hand, eyes tired and restless like he hadn't slept. The panic of the visa clock had settled into him now. He moved like a man living inside deadlines. When he saw the folder on the counter, his eyes flicked to it immediately, suspicion tightening his face. "What's that?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Nain didn't look away from him. "It's your move-out notice," she said. Voice even. Julian blinked, then laughed once sharp and disbelieving. "Move-out notice," he repeated, as if the phrase didn't belong in his mouth. "Nan, come on. I'm not some tenant." Nain's expression didn't change. "You're not a tenant," she agreed. "You're a guest, and your stay is over." Julian's jaw tightened. "Because of your mother," he muttered, and the bitterness slipped out before he could catch it. I felt heat rise in me, but I kept my hands on the counter, fingers spread, holding myself steady. Nain's eyes narrowed slightly. "Stop saying her name like she's the reason you fell," she said quietly. "You fell because you reached." Julian stepped forward, voice rising just a notch. "So what, you're kicking me out now?" he snapped. Nain's tone stayed calm. "Yes," she replied. "You have until the end of the day to collect your things." Julian stared at her, breathing heavier. "Where am I supposed to go?" he demanded, and there it was, the first crack of real fear. Not fear of losing love, fear of losing leverage. Nan didn't soften. "That's not my responsibility," she said. Julian's eyes darted toward me again, and this time the resentment was open. "You see what you've done," he said to me, voice low and accusing, as if I'd orchestrated this, as if I'd called lawyers and moved papers in the night. I turned slowly to face him, not angry, not shaking, just steady. "I see what you did," I replied, and my voice came out calm enough to surprise even me. Julian scoffed. "I apologized," he snapped. I tried to fix it. I kept my expression neutral. "You apologized for how it sounded," I said softly, not for what it meant. Nain's gaze cut back to him. "Read the folder," she said. Julian snatched it off the counter and flipped through the pages quickly, eyes moving fast like he was looking for a sentence he could argue with. The notice was simple. No insults, no threats, just dates and expectations. A clear end. Julian's face tightened as he reached the last page, and his voice lowered again, trying a different tactic. Nan, he said softer now. "You know I came here because of you. You know I don't have people here." Nain's eyes didn't soften. "You came here because you needed stability," she replied. "And you thought marrying me would give you permanent footing." Julian's mouth opened, then closed. He looked like a man caught between denying and admitting. He tried again, voice pleading now. "At least give me a few more weeks," he said. "Just until I sort things out." Nan shook her head once. "No," she said simply. She didn't explain. She didn't debate. She didn't offer a compromise. He could stretch into an opening. Julian stood there breathing hard. and I watched the exact moment he realized the house wasn't going to bend around him anymore. He looked around the kitchen at the counters, the windows, the family photos on the wall, and something in his face shifted like he was seeing the space for the first time, not as a prize, but as a place that would exist perfectly fine without him. Nain turned and walked toward her office without another word, already moving on to the next necessary thing. Julian's shoulders sagged slightly. Then he did something small that told me everything. He set the folder down carefully, almost respectfully, as if the paper had more authority than his ego. He went back upstairs without another argument. From the bottom of the staircase, I heard drawers opening, hangers clacking, the soft thud of a suitcase being pulled from under the bed. No shouting, no cruelty, just the sound of a man being separated from a story he thought he controlled. I stayed at the kitchen counter, chin lifted, breathing steady, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken by his exit. Later, as he carried his first bag down the stairs, he avoided my eyes completely. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement was gone. All that remained was a quiet, tight urgency, like someone who finally understands the floor beneath them was never theirs. He finally understood where he stood. The wedding didn't end with a scandal. It didn't end with a screaming match in a church parking lot or a dramatic post online that everybody shared. It ended the way Nain ended things when she was done. Quietly, completely, with no performance for people who didn't deserve front row seats. At first, I thought the silence might feel like relief. I thought the absence of chaos would soften the ache in my chest. But silence has its own violence. Silence makes people sit with what they did without distraction. And Julian's family had never learned how to sit in discomfort without trying to control it. Nain didn't announce anything to the world. She didn't call relatives with a trembling voice. She didn't gather friends and make herself into a spectacle. She simply stopped planning. The binder that had lived on our dining table disappeared into a drawer. The florist stopped calling. The caterer's emails went unanswered. And then one by one, small confirmations of collapse arrived, not like explosions, but like doors closing. The first thing I noticed was how the house phone stopped ringing with wedding chatter. The second was how Nain started taking calls in her office with a calm I'd never seen when she was in love. I overheard her once. Voice gentle but final. "We're going to release the date." She said a pause. "Yes, I understand the deposit terms." Another pause longer. "No, there won't be a reschedule." She hung up and didn't sigh. She didn't put a hand to her forehead. She just wrote something down on a notepad and moved on. That was when I understood she wasn't canceling a wedding. She was closing a chapter. Julian's parents didn't receive a formal "it's off" the way they expected. They received silence. They kept calling Nain, and Nain didn't pick up. They tried my phone once, and I didn't answer either. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I had learned something about people who treat elders like obstacles. If you give them even one sentence, they will twist it until it becomes their permission slip. Nain wasn't giving them that. She was letting them feel the void of their own assumptions. A few days later, I saw the first invitation come back. It arrived in our mailbox in a pale envelope stamped and returned, as if the person sending it had never opened it. Nain picked it up without changing her expression and set it on the counter. Then another one came, then another. Not because people were being cruel, but because silence makes people cautious. When a wedding is real, excitement spills over. When it's not, people pull back quietly, avoiding involvement in whatever private mess they can sense under the surface. Julian's mother drove over one afternoon in a fury dressed as concern. I was in the living room when she entered without waiting for anyone to welcome her. heels clicking too fast on the floor like she was marching. She carried her purse tucked under her arm like a shield face, tight eyes bright with humiliation. She wanted to turn into anger. Where is she? She demanded the moment she saw me. Where is Nan? I didn't rise from my seat. I didn't offer her water. I didn't smile. I simply looked at her until she shifted. She's busy, I said calmly. Julian's mother's nostrils flared. Busy, she snapped. She can't be too busy to answer her phone. Do you know what people are saying? There it was again. People always. People. Her husband stepped in behind her slower, trying to look dignified. But his eyes were darting around the room like he was searching for proof that the life they imagined was still within reach. We've had to explain things, he said. Voice controlled but strained. There are deposits. There are guests. This is embarrassing. Embarrassing, not heartbreaking, not disappointing, embarrassing. I felt something settle in my chest like a stone dropping into water. You were embarrassed. When Nain defended her mother, I said softly. Julian's mother's lips parted, then pressed together again. Don't twist this, she hissed. We were trying to protect the atmosphere. I finished for her, my voice calm as glass. The words made her flinch because she knew I had heard them in her tone from the beginning. Nain entered the room, then not rushing, not stiff, just controlled. She didn't greet them with warmth or hostility. She greeted them with clarity. Why are you here? She asked, voice. Even Julian's mother immediately softened her tone into pleading. Sweetheart, she said, stepping forward, this has gone too far. We need to salvage what we can. People are asking questions. The venue wants a final answer. If you don't want to marry him right now, fine, but we can postpone. Nayan held up one hand, small and steady. There is nothing to postpone, she said. Julian's father's face tightened. You can't do this quietly, he snapped, and the mask finally cracked. You can't just make everything disappear. Nain's gaze stayed flat. I'm not making anything disappear, she replied. I'm letting it end. Julian's mother's eyes flashed with rage. Do you know how much money we've lost? She demanded. Nain didn't blink. Then you should have raised your son to understand boundaries, she said. That sentence landed like a slap without being loud. Julian's mother stumbled backward a step as if she hadn't expected Nain to speak like that. Her husband's jaw clenched. This is vindictive, he muttered. Nain's voice stayed calm. Its consequences she corrected. And you won't get a scene from me to make yourselves feel important. Julianne's mother looked at me, then eyes sharp, and I saw the urge in her to lash out. But there was nothing she could hit. No argument, no tears, no begging, only quiet. She grabbed her purse tighter and turned toward the door, shoulders stiff with humiliation. She couldn't disguise anymore. Her husband followed, face set like stone. As they left, Julian's mother hissed over her shoulder. You'll regret this. Nain didn't answer. She didn't even watch them go. She walked back into her office and closed the door softly, the sound gentle and final. Later that evening, another message came from the venue confirming the date had been released and the deposit was forfeited. Nain read it not at once and deleted it. No announcement, no explanation, just the slow, quiet disappearance of a wedding that had been treated like a strategy meeting instead of a vow. And as I sat in my living room listening to the silence settle back into our walls, I realized why it was breaking Julian's family more than any public humiliation could. They wanted a fight so they could call Nayan emotional. They wanted a scene so they could call me bitter. They wanted noise so they could hide inside it. Nayan gave them silence instead. And in that silence, the truth had nowhere to go but into their own throats. Nothing hurts pride like silence. After the noise stopped, I expected emptiness. I expected the house to feel like it had been hollowed out by everything that almost happened. But what surprised me was how quickly the air in our home returned to something I recognized: steady, breathable hours. The guest room doors stayed closed. The hallway stopped holding tension, and the dining table stopped feeling like a stage. There were no wedding papers spread out anymore, no vendors calling no forced smiles to keep peace, just ordinary life returning in quiet pieces. Nain's heels by the door after work, the kettle whistling in the morning, the sound of her voice on calls that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with leadership. Julian's absence didn't leave a wound the way I'd feared. It left space. And sometimes space is what you need to remember who you are. The first week after everything ended, Nain didn't talk much about him. She didn't mention him at the breakfast table. She didn't replay scenes. She didn't ask me to validate her choices. She carried herself like a woman who had already mourned what she needed to mourn in private, but I could see the shift in her even in the smallest moments. She moved differently now, more aware of where she stood in rooms, less interested in smoothing other people's discomfort. There was a quiet hardness to her boundaries that didn't feel cruel. It felt earned. One evening, she came home later than usual, dropped her keys in the bowl by the entryway, and stood in the kitchen doorway watching me stir a pot like she was watching something sacred. "Mama," she said softly. I glanced up. Her eyes were tired but clear. "I had a meeting today," she added, "with the senior team." I nodded, waiting. Nain walked closer and leaned her hip against the counter, arms folded. "They told me something," she said, and a small, humorless smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "They said the way I handled everything, it made them respect me more." I didn't respond right away because pride can be loud if you let it, and this was not a story that needed loudness. "You protected what your father built," I said quietly. Nain's face softened for a brief second at the mention of her father, then steadied again. "I protected you too," she replied, and her voice dipped low on the last word like it mattered most. My throat tightened and I looked away toward the stove, so she wouldn't see my eyes shine. "You didn't have to choose like that," I whispered. Nain shook her head once. "I did," she said simply. "Because the day he tapped your shoulder and told you to stream your place in my life, he told me who he was." She exhaled slowly, and I refuse to build a future on someone who thinks my mother is an obstacle. The next piece came quietly, not as a grand reveal, but as a natural step in Nain's way of closing doors properly. A few days later, she invited me to come with her again. This time, it wasn't a lawyer's office. It was the company. She walked me through the building like she wanted me to see it as more than an abstract thing my husband left behind. People greeted her with respect, real respect, not flattery. And when they saw me, Nain didn't introduce me like I was a fragile detail to hide. She introduced me as her mother, clearly, warmly, and there was a subtle shift in the room when she did, like people recognized she was anchoring herself publicly, not just privately. Later in her office, she handed me a small framed photo. It was an old picture of my husband standing beside a sign with the company name Younger, and proud his arm around Nain when she was still small enough to tuck under his shoulder. "I want this in the lobby," Nain said. "Not for him," she added quickly, meaning Julian for us. I stared at the photo, my chest tightening. "He would be proud," I said. Nain's eyes flickered, and she looked away for a second, like she needed a breath. "I didn't do it perfectly," she admitted, voice softer. I let someone get close enough to try. She looked back at me, but I didn't let him stay. That was the quiet power of it. Julian didn't get a scene to twist. His parents didn't get a spectacle to weaponize. The company didn't get shaken. No accounts were drained. No secrets were stolen. The danger was seen early, contained early, and removed with dignity before it could become disaster. And in the weeks that followed, little messages drifted in. People who had heard something, people who wanted gossip, people who wanted to know what happened. Nain gave them nothing, not because she was ashamed, but because she had learned the truth that women like us learn too late sometimes. You don't owe your pain to the public just because other people are curious. The only conversation that mattered happened one quiet Sunday morning. Nain sat across from me at the table, sunlight warming the wood, and she reached for my hand without speaking first. Her fingers were warm, steady. "I'm sorry," she said again, but different this time. Not just for the times I corrected you, for the times I almost made you small to keep love. I squeezed her hand, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't heavy like before. It was clean. "We learn," I said softly. Nain nodded once. "We learn," she echoed. Then she released my hand and stood up, shoulders back, eyes clear, and I watched my daughter walk through our home like a woman who would never again confuse peace with permission. In the end, what stayed wasn't a wedding or a man or a picture-perfect story. What stayed was dignity. What stayed was truth. What stayed was the kind of love that doesn't require you to disappear to keep it. And that's the lesson my mother gave me long before Julian ever touched my shoulder. A home that demands your silence is not a home. It's a place you're surviving in until you finally remember you're allowed to stand.